What better way to start the lesson on how to play the chess opening without knowing the opening than to show you my game against a FIDE master that I played last year at standard time controls in a rated tournament game. Let's look at some ideas that are a bit deeper than the ones that can be found in the video on 7 opening chess principles. If you're a beginner and you haven't seen that, go watch that. It should be in the beginner playlist. Okay, I'm white here playing against the very first FIDE master I had ever played. I decided to play in the master section because it's difficult to beat 1,500 players, so I figured I might as well struggle against a master instead of a lower rated player. So I opened with d4, and he played c5, immediately throwing a gambit at me, which is very fitting because we're going to be looking at all the gambits that players can play against you and how to think about them and how they impact the center and time and space and force. As I mentioned in another video, I think where Carlson plays the expert, I'm not sure, when your opponent throws a c-pawn at you for one of your center pawns, he's wanting to trade a less valuable pawn for a more valuable pawn. That's my simplistic way of looking at it, and that's good enough for me. Opening theory may have other reasons for playing those moves, but what is opening theory other than a glorified way of saying trial and error? But there's another common reason that gambits are played, and that is so the opponent can gain developmental tempos. If I capture, he can develop a piece, because I've actually moved my pawn twice by capturing, and he can use that extra tempo to develop. Of course, capturing is playable, and if you're a better player, you should still be able to beat your opponent. So if we're not going to capture the pawn, what other options do we have? Well, we can develop our knight. We could play our c-pawn here, so if he does capture, we'll replace the pawn and still have our d and e pawn. Another factor to consider when there's engagement of any pieces, where one piece can capture the other piece, when your opponent captures, he actually gains a tempo as well, because you usually have to recapture. And since I'm not planning on capturing this pawn, that actually makes this pawn the attacker. And I don't like having my men attacked because it gives your opponent the attack tempo. So I chose the option of pushing forward. Now, of course, you've violated the principle of moving the same piece twice, but chess is never that simple. There's another factor in chess called compensation. Every time you move, you gain something and you lose something. So what have we gained? Well, now he can't bring his knight to its ideal square on c6. And we've gained some center space in his territory. Now if we back up a second and look at what happens when we defend with the knight, or develop our knight rather, because he does have this capture tempo, you should look at those things before you decide to develop and look at the consequences of his capture. And it doesn't take that much calculation when you know about the power moves, the forcing moves, the controlling moves. Go look at those videos if you haven't looked at those. The one on the 6 power moves, on how to find chess tactics with the 6 power moves. So if he captures and we take back with the knight, that's one full move, his move, my move, and then you can see that he can hit the knight with a little guy. And he gains a little initiative there. If we take with the queen, he can hit the queen with the knight here. That's just 1.5 ply. Again, developing a piece, and my queen has to run. That's just looking 1.5 ply, and these are the moves you need to be looking at when you make your decisions. So I played d5, and he responded with e5, giving me the chance to capture the pawn en passant. But then he could recapture with the f-pawn and have a very strong center. That realization was enough for me to not want to capture the pawn. You can't control every move in chess, but some of the moves you can control and choose to make can shape the entire strategic nature of the game. So I chose to play c4, which means I'm planning to close the center, or giving the opportunity for the center to be closed. And when the center is closed, that means most of the battle will take place on the king side or the queen side, and it'll be a race. Or you can attack the attack if you want to try to draw. But this game took an interesting turn in the middle game, as you'll see. My opponent played d6, which opens up this bishop and prevents me from harassing the bishop on e7 with this pawn push. Knight to c3, developing, supports e4, He plays bishop to e7, and now I really lock up the center with e4. I've moved a lot of pawns, and generally you should move pieces and not pawns in the opening, but when the center is closed, you have more time to develop your pieces later. The placement of the C, D, and E pawns determines much of how the game will be played, and we'll be looking at that in other videos and what you can and cannot control regarding their movement. Since in this game the center has been clarified, the next step will be to determine where to place the bishops and the knights. But first let me point something else out. These pawns are on dark squares, which makes this bishop black's bad bishop, and mine are on light squares, which makes my light-colored bishop the bad bishop. In another video on the 16 forcing moves, one of those moves and one of the questions you should ask is which pieces can engage other pieces. That is, place them in an attack posture, because that will give them the ability to trade off a piece. That needs to be included when you're evaluating the board, or rather every time your opponent moves a piece. So when my opponent played the bishop to e7, and knowing that this is his bad bishop, I looked to see if he could try to trade it off, and he can by moving bishop to g5, hitting my bishop. Now, to be honest, I play a lot of online blitz, and I've gone down this path before. So I say learn the hard way. That's another way of getting opening knowledge. And equally important is to understand the positional and strategic nature of the position. So he does play bishop to g5 to trade off my bishop, my good bishop, for his bad bishop. So now I had to decide whether to capture or allow him to capture later. And by now most of us have heard Smirnov's to take is a mistake. You realize if I capture the bishop, it develops his queen, already getting his pieces over to the king side, which is what his plan probably should be, since the center is closed up. So I didn't capture and developed my bishop. So he captures, and now this is a very interesting question. Which should you take back with, the rook or the queen? Pause the video and think about it for a while. So pause the video. Okay, if you said the rook so that you could develop a piece and put the rook on an open file, you have to realize this file is not open, and it could be very difficult to get it open. And now that I don't have a dark squared bishop, I need my queen to cover the dark squares. So I captured with the queen, which also keeps his queen out from coming to g5. With knights, you're looking for outposts in enemy territory. So the f5 square is a possibility for this knight, and the f4 square is a possibility for one of his knights. I'm pretty much out of any memory from previous games, and I'm on my own. So he plays knight to e7, and you can see he can play to g6 and then to f4 with his knight. I played knight to e2 with the same idea. He castles, and I play knight to g3 right away so I could challenge this f5 square if he decides to push. Not that it stops that push, but at least I could trade off some pieces. But he chose knight to g6, continuing with this idea of hitting the f4 square, and that knight becomes a real problem for me. I castle. He develops his other knight, d7. And I remember at this point during the game that I realized I needed to come up with my own plan. He's probably going to mobilize his pieces on the king side, like I said. So I figured I needed to start an attack on the queen side, which is generally what you do when the center is closed. That is, if both sides are trying to win. And I figured, well, why not give it a shot? And also, I'm not sure if I could dissolve his attack over here successfully. So I'd rather have my own counterattack going as a strategy. Other than my opponent trying to dictate opening play with his pawn moves, there haven't been any real threats yet. And in order to gain the initiative, you need to be working towards a threat, a real threat, so you can try to control your opponent. So I need to develop a fairly long-range plan right now. You don't need to calculate all the moves, but at least know where you're going to concentrate your forces. And for less experienced players watching this, You may wonder how I came up with these moves. One of the opening principles is to unite your rooks, which means you have to move your queen. But you shouldn't just randomly move your queen anywhere. It should be moved to where you're planning your middle game attack, or your middle game build-up. So I decided to move my queen to e3 to focus on this c5 square. I know that's going to sound bizarre to a lot of people watching this video, and this is very advanced thinking. But my plan was to move my rook to b1, push this pawn. I knew he would have to move this knight, and then I could actually create a real threat of potentially winning a pawn by capturing, recapturing. My queen could recapture. So he would probably be forced to capture the pawn, opening up the b file. That is master level thinking. I know that now because I wouldn't have come up with that years ago. So he played knight to f6, and you have to ask, what is the threat? Well, now he can play knight to g4, hitting my queen. Power move number 2 or 5. So I stopped that with f3. And now he plays an odd move. He played a6. I'm not sure what his thinking was because the b5 square is covered by my pieces. Maybe he wanted to open up this rook. Or maybe it was just a suboptimal move. So now I played rook to b1. I'm going to ram this pawn. I'm going to force this file open, make my rook strong. And he continued with knight to f4. Hitting my bishop, but this is my bad bishop, so at the moment I don't mind him trading it. That's probably a bit too simplistic, but as a general rule that's the case. And then I played b4, and that is a threat. As I said, I could capture the pawn, capture, and the queen could recapture. He could try to defend it, of course, but he decides to capture. I recapture, and now he slides the knight to d7. And this I did not anticipate, and I got scared. He's taking the c5 square on a very good outpost, and that'll hit my bishop twice. And in closed positions, the knights rule. I didn't like what was happening at this point, and I made a strange decision. I decided to make him think twice about bringing his knight to c5, so I moved my bishop. Rather than giving the tempo on the bishop, I'd have to decide what to do with him anyway. And at this point, I started chuckling to myself because I'm violating almost everything I mentioned in my book. I created an undefended piece, power move number 3. I'm defending my knight with my queen. As I mentioned, kings and queens make poor defenders. My piece coordination is looking a little bit shaky, maybe more than a little bit. And I said, wouldn't it be ironic if this ends up losing the game for me? And now he makes another strange decision. He plays b5. He's gambiting a pawn for activity. So I take, he takes, and now I'd like you to pause the video again and decide what you would do. Should you take this pawn? Pause the video. Okay, so should we take the pawn with the knight? Well, if we do that, we're leaving this undefended pawn here. Remember, your pieces are always doing something offensively and defensively, and before you move them, you have to see the consequences and the change that'll take place. Should we take with the rook? Well, then the bishop can skewer the 2 rooks. So he's giving me a chance to make a mistake here, and I don't fall for it. So I played rook to b1, and now there is a threat to capture with the rook, actually. So now he defends, bishop to a6. And again, if I capture with the knight, bishop takes, the rook can capture this pawn. And the rook would penetrate enemy territory, hitting my undefended bishop, skewering this pawn, which is already attacked once by the knight. Very scary indeed. So I don't capture the pawn. My next goal was to get this knight out of here. So I moved my knight to f5. It does hit this pawn. Then I was thinking I could play g3 and get that knight out. If he checks me, I can come here and he'd have to run. He plays rook to c8. And now I'd like you to pause the video and ask, like you should on every move, is there a threat? Is that a threat? So pause the video. Okay, depending on your level, you go, oh, this knight is defended by my queen, no problem. Well, again, like I said, you should always look at piece engagements and which pieces can capture other pieces sacrificially, rooks for lower rated pieces, the exchange sacrifices. And notice if the rook captures the knight and my queen recaptures, knight hits here, check, winning my queen. He's a tricky devil, this FM. Fortunately, I saw that and moved my rook here, defending the square, over defending the square, and I figured I might have time to pop the knight and then renew my attack on the b file. But after he plays queen to a5, I started shaking in my boots. And I truly thought I was going to lose the game at this point. Now that I've said that, pause the video and see if you can come up with a solution to this. My rook's undefended. If I move my rook, the knight is exposed. 2 attackers on it, I'd lose my knight. This is a really tough jam. So pause the video and think about it for quite a while, actually. Pause the video. Okay, you probably see this undefended pawn. I could take this pawn and maybe get his rook. Let's see, if I take his pawn, he takes my rook. I take his rook. He takes with the rook. And the attack is renewed on this knight and this undefended bishop. So that's a problem. That doesn't work. Then I was desperately looking for checks, for power moves. Power move number 1, please. And fortunately, there was this power move here. This check. So I throw this check in. Check. And the king has to run. Okay, now that we've gone this far, pause the video again and see what move you would make. So pause the video. Okay, what did you come up with? See, the knight can attack the queen here. That's really cool. But it doesn't work. If I bring my knight here now, the rook can just capture the knight, and then he wins my rook. Removes the defender. So I move the rook, defending the knight. My bishop's still undefended here, and he pushes the pawn. Oh no. If I move the knight, I lose the bishop. What to do? What to do? Okay, so now I hit the queen. He takes, I take, and the pawn's hitting the knight. I've gained a tempo needed to save my piece. So he runs. And now how do you handle this? He's attacking my rook. You know, you need to give back material sometimes in order to save your pieces. So I move my knight out of the attack. He captures my rook. I recapture with my bishop and breathe a sigh of relief. Because I knew now that I wasn't going to lose the game. I would at least draw. But now I actually have a slight advantage with this passed pawn. And now in his masterly way, he re-maneuvers the knight to get to this better d4 square. More centralized, he'll be hitting more squares, hitting my bishop. And where do rooks belong? They belong behind pawns, especially pawns that you're going to push. So I played rook to c1. He plays knight to d4. I push the pawn, and he checks me. Oh no, I didn't see this fork. Oh, no worries though. I just captured the knight with my queen. I'm okay. Oh no, the bishop can take my queen. But guess what? That didn't happen. After I took his knight, he placed his hand out to shake hands. He resigned. Do you see why? I mean, after all, his back rank is covered, right, by 2 pieces. That's how it appeared anyway when he forked my rook and king. But now if he takes my queen, I can push and get a queen. And if he takes, rook takes, and it's mate because of this back rank weakness. That was the true beauty of this check earlier. It pushed the king into the corner, creating the back rank weakness. And let's back up a bit here. If, where are we? And if he doesn't capture and brings the queen back, I can take queens, rook takes, and I'm up a piece. And we'll go on to win the game, of course, and that's why he resigned. So this lesson was mostly on the opening moves, but knew there would be some more things you could learn by going over the rest of the game. And now I'll get back to work working on some more lessons on how to play the opening without knowing the opening. Please subscribe and talk to you later.